Hello everyone, today we talk about the future of education and for what is especially our concern, the future of the positive application of theory in practice in a civilizational sense. And as you know, this has been my concern for a long time because I believe that every time we talk about history, we make a great effort in that direction because history has a somewhat all-encompassing value, at least it should. It is founded in reality. It's not a matter of, just opinion or some kind of subjectivistic, let's say, pool of information that you can just twist as you like. This is in fact a problem that we're facing, I think, today more than in any other time, and that doesn't seem to look great for the future as a tendency. And this is what I'm convinced of. I think that we're not really picturing it the way it deserves, but it seems to me that we are into a major crisis, which is clear at least to everyone. But the main idea is that this crisis is somewhat big, real. Maybe the people will even stress the concreteness of the crisis, make it a sort of, everything would be great if it wasn't just for, I don't know, whoever your favorite enemy you blame everything on is. And if we instead, as the good people, the brave the people, the intelligent people, the valuable people, the pure people, whatever, were in charge, everything would be good and fine. The crisis I see here is it's not just a temporary thing, right? You can't blame it just on one specific actor. Something that, of course, is going on in the world is overwhelmingly connected to the policy of single countries and what they do, how they affect, even indirectly, most of the times in the entire global dynamics. And that's what we got also habituated to reason like. We just like to pinpoint and narrow down explanations, not just monofactual causes, but just saying okay, let's keep things just confined in space and time. Say this is the exact thing that makes things went wrong. This is the entire issue that, but actually this is just the mostly phenomenological consequence of a much greater crisis that is basically is never stopped historically, right? I would say it's a millenary process, but it sounds as if millenary was endowed there with some kind of traditional superiority. It's not the case. This is exactly the world aging, right? And it's not just a traditional belief, but it's also the second principle of thermodynamics, and it can't really be debated, right? The world can always do better, because you can't say, given a certain amount of resources, how well, let's say, you can do, right? You can always do better at every time, even if the improvement was minimal. But overall, right, so everybody has tried to make things better, right? To put a patch on, I don't know, a hole where water is pouring in the ship, etc., and pretending that that's going to hold, right, for a while. But first of all, those who haven't been struggling in that specific moment will simply forget that there's been a struggle in the first place, also because they haven't quite been through the same. I think this is especially true for our time, specifically because we were habituated to tragedy and catastrophe and terrible effort and sacrifice and all a duty ethics up to very few generations ago, right? It's not saying that there aren't people who do this nowadays, but again, overall, this system has been collapsing further. And again, it's not been collapsing further because of necessarily one party or another, or one country or another. It's generally what we have from one side positively achieved, especially in terms of material wealth, that has never been so great in the history of mankind, right? For which also those who complain about poverty, which surely exists in some relative terms in a warring way somewhere, and even close, right, to us, do not take in consideration the entirety of the picture. That is to say that not only things are exponentially better than they have ever been, but back in the day, people who didn't have this were normally used to spit blood and sweat tears to achieve even a minimal part of what we waste today, every day, without doing anything. For us just to sit here, pretending that our existential questions are so more advanced than those who lived at the time. It actually has nothing to do with that. What really happened in practice is that we lost moral strength. Because if you're not habituated to moral strength, it's like a muscle. If you don't exercise that, eventually it will be weaker, right? It will be. You can say, oh well, now, but I'm kind of fit, and just now maybe I'm in between exercising, and so I don't care. Then after some months, if you want to go back making the same exercise, you see that you've grown weaker, and that it's going to be more difficult than before, because in the meanwhile you have also aged by a certain degree. Maybe you can understand this better over the years. Believe me, I do, because I used to be very sporty, at least by a certain degree back in the day, and I'm still somewhat athletic, but I can't feel that. First of all, I'm not so young anymore, but at the time, but that every time I want to go back, and I do go back, and I can even get fit for my standards, but it takes more energy, it takes more time, takes something more that at some point I'm legitimately maybe not even having the time anymore. So I'm not saying that the challenges that the world has today are just not important. Actually, they may be the largest they've ever had. But the point is that the absolute quantity of effort that would be required to face them is enormous compared to what we have habituated by simply saying, okay, if I have just a roof on my head and I can eat every day, but it's not that I have to be. Why do I have to do things? Right? This is the standard attitude, right? If you ask anybody, what do you want to be? I want to be happy. And I want to be healthy. And how? Right? Because you're going to, first of all, being happy is not a normal psychological status, right? A person who is forever happy is not at a point of arrival, right? First of all, you're an ignorant, just on the ground of psychology. But secondly, what kind of person you want to be, right? Just people are forever happy. I don't think they ever exist, but they would be surely classified like, having a mental illness, not even a disorder properly, and they would have a pretty miserable life. Secondly, what do you think? That you eat healthy, whatever it means, just essentially judging people, maybe eat things that are maybe healthier than yours, but you, for some agnostic heresy, you think you're superior. You want to get a brain tumor at 30. Like, do you think it works like that? Do you think that if you eat something that this changes, in the environment you live in, all the shit that you get through the air, through the water, whatever, and, you'll be healthy? And how do you get healthy also, right? If you don't make physical activity, that's another thing. Everybody complaining, there's morbid obesity everywhere. You know what? In Auschwitz, there weren't fat people, right? And there is a reason for that. So let's cut all the crap of, unless you have a severe disease like a glandular problem, whatever. But if you see in certain populations that people from every ethnicity coming from everywhere, they suddenly become, for the first time in history, morbidly obese, you can simply make a physical equation and calculating how much energy it takes to get obese, and simply saying, this is at least in part something that you could use in some kind of physical activity. Right? And people say, well, I don't want to make physical activity because I work, and when I want to get home, I want to eat Cheetos and just sitting on my couch. Well, your grandparents were habituated to work 12 hours, to destroy themselves, and guess what? None of them were morbidly obese because of that, right? And so those were working, let's say, for the bad reasons, because life was shit, and if you didn't work, you didn't get anything. Today you have the good reason for being a better person, and you don't do shit. Just so think about how disgusting humanity has become, right? So all the speeches on, we're so lucky, we should think about sufferings, how people were in the past was a terrible thing. What the hell do you do to deserve living in a better condition? Nothing. So I think it's fair that it's not fair because, first of all, I don't want to pay for your health, right? I want to pay for the health of people who really get illnesses that they couldn't foresee, or that are not ostensibly connected to the lack of responsibility in their own lifestyle. For those, I'm willing to pay a lot, even more than what I pay. But for a bunch of lazy asses who do not have a discipline, a dignity, frankly, because that's where it gets down to, right? And morality, having the idea of a discipline. I'm not talking about even just about physicality. I'm talking about properly, you're poor, and what did you do in your life exactly to improve that condition, right? Were you a slave from the 18th century? Somebody prevented you from succeeding? You have everything. If you have a car, if you have a smartphone, whatever, you can't say, I'm poor, right? It's just plain stupid. It means that you have no idea of how, just again, a couple of generations ago, people actually lived, which is even more disgusting when you hear, of course, that these are allegedly, Marxistic people, or say left-leaning people. I mean, if you are a leftist, you should have at least a sacred obsession and reverence and subservience to the altar of the broken backs of your ancestors, how much the hell they worked for having what you have. And instead you don't give a shit. I mean, all the effort that these people did, and they would have kept doing if they were free, if they were, rich, if they had those means. If you had your means that are disgustingly more opulent than anything they could even dream to have in a lifetime at the time, you should just working the hell like a maniac and just succeeding immediately, because considering the average laziness and incapacity and ignorance and stupidity and whatever, you just by having those same rhythms, you would simply become a millionaire, maybe not overnight, but easily sooner or later. And so when we talk about education, you say, well, but then there's some mechanistic reason. How can we improve education? There's no improvement if the existential level is this one, right? We can't talk about education, but we have to look again at the wall, because otherwise you will not get what education is. How does this emptiness reflect in education? First of all, I should point out that this decrease in individual value, the incapacity, say properly, we are forgetting the conceptual categories of absolute and relative. I mean, people stop thinking, even for the speech I immediately did, that, the absolute reality shows you this, and that what you personally think in relative subjective terms doesn't matter about that. You're saying, but how do you know that you're not talking about that? I'm talking that because science tells us that IQ is dropping. Science is telling us that ever less people work and want to work, right? And work well, and work proficiently, and work with commitment, and work because they have an idea of how to really produce something through which they can be rewarded, right? We know that it's becoming, it's a mass phenomenon that occurred in many other times in history, right? In big times of crises, all what happens, you can see in the late Roman Empire, in the mid 14th century, all the time. What happens is that the masses basically deresponsibilize themselves. They say simply, I don't want to make effort, right? There may be, and all this normally coming because masses exist only if there's been something that can support a mass before. So enormous resources, normally a moment of wealth, of greatness, of prosperity. So when people are not really habituated to pressure, right? As soon as there's pressure, you sit on the top of of a pile of money, just like we do now, and we say, oh no, we surrender, because we have morally weakened so much that we have even forgotten again that there's been a time, not very long time ago, where it was normal for make that pile of money against struggles and against odds that brought us to struggle in ways that do not even remotely compare for intensity to the ones that we have now that are utterly ridiculous, right, from an individual point of view, right? So people give away their own responsibility. They decide that it's useless to do anything. They say, okay, well, I will content myself of ever less because I don't see the point of it all, right? You don't see the point of it all because, again, for the first time, you need to do something more, right? Because you have, even this is maybe a cognitive problem because somebody told you falsely, because maybe they were exalted enough and already, see, the average person's never really fully participated even to the exploit of civilization. They told you, well, everything will go better. This is something that we have in history, actually, just from 200 years, right? Nobody before thought that there were things like continuous progress, for example, or even exponential progress, as we have had for, maybe not exponential, but massive, in certain cases, even exponential, starting from the Industrial Revolutions and so on, right? It's a cognitive problem because you have been told that everything would be cool, right? When you were a kid in the 90s, they told you that, you would live 120 years old, you would go living on Mars, that everything would be fantastic, that the world would always, more realistically even, the world will always get better. Think about Fukuyama's bullshit, the idea that it will never be, wars, that we will simply buy people with fast foods, people that, again, do not have any cultural, civilizational capacity, but just because, you give them, a hamburger, you think that they will suddenly turn into civilized people. It doesn't work like that, right? It's never worked like that. And it's been our fault if we fooled ourselves into thinking that, because we were the ones who actually succeeded and also promised the world something that objectively didn't happen. And the question is, why should it have happened in place? So this last aspect is probably getting dark turns if I were to continue. But the idea, again, is that if you have been habituated to the idea that everything will be cool, that you're special just because you exist, or because, you can get everything you want if you want to, and you actually don't, and your entire life has been too easy to even understand that you had to do an effort to get those things, and not only you don't get them, because in a florid situation, because you're incapable of getting them, but because you've never cultivated a structure or a base, again, having some kind of knowledge, some kind of capacity to do it. But when there is a pressure, this even seems like an apocalyptic switch to you. You will depress yourself because you just don't have the moral caution, let's say, to absorb that hit. Right, this is wholly normal. This is the entire history of mankind in many ways. The idea that, I never liked the idea of the tougher people come out of times of crisis, but after the others have softened themselves up. But in a sense, it is so, right? After great exploits, especially, the massive, the collective moral forces tend to be left free, right? And this brings actually on the fore many other issues that we're witnessing today. That is to say, but so what? What we believed, even in terms of values, let's say democracy and civic values, in fact, do not exist, right? Should we surrender? Many people even are not habituated to understand, again, why they had what they had, and they think that, if we are going down, it's because the others are better. This is not true, right? If you are going down, it's because you were better than those, and those haven't improved at all, and actually they keep underperforming dramatically from any cultural indicator, and you presume that you can trade self-sabotaging your own civilization, those kind of models, because admittedly, you don't belong to that civilization anymore. As I often say, Westernness is a privilege of an elite. It's not for the masses. It's not for the average idiot that is born in a place and thinks that is cool without doing anything. That's collectivism, right? Nationalism is the first step in the ladder towards communism, right? It's a collectivistic, leftistic ideology that was born, in fact, a revolutionary red political movement during the masses of the 19th century. What kind of tradition is there? Again, the average nationalist doesn't even understand this, has never heard of this, thinks that he's cool because, I don't know, not just even because he belongs to a group, because he thinks that sticking to that ideology, it's over, right? Just being an underschooled imbecile that doesn't understand anything about even, some mildly complex political or, military or social dynamic, and thinking, but if I stick to that primitive bullshit, I will, have solved all my problems. How can you see? How can you fail to see, unless, of course, you don't know anything about history for that matter, that the sheer complexity of the world today requires a massive capacity that has nothing to do with some systems that are evidently tending toward the morally relativistic, and that actually do not even explain why what you do would be performing for, because you see how many nationalists seem to be foreigners for some reason, right? How many people say, in other countries it's shit, but it's better than here because they want to impose you transgender ideology. The question is that simple: what kind of weak inferior slob you are for being in a superior civilization to let transgenderism or critical race theory, etc., existing in the first place, right? Where were you when this happened? Where were your great values and identity and national force and strength for this thing to even happen? And why aren't you capable of stopping that on your own, right? This is a struggle with yourself, first of all, then within your own country. What do you have to sabotage and destroy the superiority of your own country by giving literally a gun to other people that whose entire national identity is exclusively killing you because they hate you, because you were superior at some point than them, and they can't accept that because they know their shit. This is the problem that we're getting nowadays, right? And this all starts from a lack of scientific culture, of course, which scientific properly in the traditional sense of the term, that is an all-encompassing idea. It's not scientific. Again, we divide between humanism. How many, again, conservatives, this is what I'm saying all the time, they think that humanities are worthless, right? Let's assume that when we come from the humanistic faculties have been taken over by Marxists. The question is, why can't you take them back? Right, so you need to invent that there are the strong powers, the single thought, that there is some evil monster playing. It has to be a Jew, of course, because otherwise you will not happy. It's to be the Americans. It has to be NATO, whatever. And why aren't you strong enough to simply reverse the tide? I mean, if you really belonged to a community that was full of strong, how can you stop them? Right, and it's not incidental that these ideas spread in culturally collapsing countries, because totalitarianism, dictatorships, authoritarian regimes do belong to inferior cultures, right? All these regimes belong to communities that are less educated, more stupid, more poor, that live in more precarious hygienic conditions, that have high crime rate, that rape constantly times higher, that have a much higher rate of depression, actual depression, not the depression that, turns out that only 4% of people in Western countries that are diagnosed by, leftistic and lenient, great experts actually are depressed. Being depressed is something real. Being depressed is not waking up one day and realizing that you are a complete failure as a human being because you come from a shitty family, a shitty background, you don't know to do anything, you're poor, you're stupid, and you have no quality, and say, oh, I'm depressed. No, that simply means that you're pressured by reality, right? Depression is something that people don't even know why they are depressed. You give them antidepressants, and those are the only people that actually heal. All the others become maniacs, criminals, drug addicts, and so on. That's the ugly truth of the world, right? There is no other shortcut. It's not because the system is oppressive. It's not because you're a poor victim. It's not because you must be understood. No, you should be straightened up violently if needed, and until you have something called a backbone, right, or something like called average dignity of humanity. That is not something that you are born with. It's something that you have to earn, right? The average dignity of humanity is that I may have some mercy towards a human life form, because I think that maybe at some point, essentially being wrong every time, you will have a shot in life of some kind, right? But it's the same reason why we gun down terrorists. It's not that we should give a shit about their life, right? They're endangered the system, boom, dead. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. We should all rejoice because of it, or at least look at ourselves and say, how could our glorious system actually make this happen, right? And so there is really nothing, you see, on my channel, I really don't give a damn about who you are, right? I can be pleased by seeing, where you come from, etc., these niceties and all, but frankly, we should all stop thinking that we have any meaning at all, humanly, because we are born anywhere, we are of a certain religion, we come from far. Nobody gives a shit about that, right? The only thing that counts about you is how capable you are as a human being. All the rest has no value, has no meaning, right? And you cannot dress yourself up with some wishful thinking, pretending that because you wear a mask of a certain color, you're special, because it's a mask, right? And you perfectly know what's behind that. That is nothing, because if you need to wear a mask, first of all, you're a coward. You're something that you cannot prove to the rest of the world of being valuable, that you're scared of. You're paranoid. In fact, the first discriminant in terms of civilization is paranoia, right? This is something that as Westerners we haven't understood properly over the years, because we have been fortunately habituated to our standards to the point that, again, there is nothing to be flattered in absolute terms, but in relative terms to the rest of the world, of course, we must be. We must, first of all, reacquire the concept of absolute and relative. You can't fuck around. There is no moral relativism acceptable in a civilization. There's never been. Because what makes the difference is undeniable. And unless you're going to crash with your face into it, if you don't really want to believe that, is that the rest of the world is paranoid, right? The main feature of civilization is clarity, confidence, reason, intelligence, not venting yourself, living passive-aggressive, monosyllabical statements every time your team scores, from a source that you can't even verify, but passes on a social network, scores a hit or not. Right? This is also what the entire war in Ukraine has become. Right? Both sides. I'm not saying I'm overwhelmingly pro-Ukraine, and I consider people who do not understand the reason to be completely illiterate by any kind of political and strategic point of view. And I made an entire series on the Krieg that I will also come back on, and I don't need to explain anything for that matter. Why this is the case, but from both sides of the aisle, the average person, it's not that if you are conservative or a liberal, you're intelligent. This is what we have to eradicate violently, is necessarily the idea that that competence is something related to being a human being. Only merit is a valid criterion of evaluation. The rest does not exist. It's not like you can't say it, you can't claim it, but your opinion will be worthless. It will not have any actual consequence, right? And that's the point we are instead lulling ourselves about. We are essentially apostatizing extremely simplistic, appreciations about some concepts at the end of the day, because I don't see even taking sides anymore as an average thing, right? The first element of complete lack of political and strategic intelligence is not being capable of explaining things on your own, right? Not being capable of saying, I can affirm this because I have this evidence and this other evidence, and this plus this makes this. And if you counter me, I will change idea if you actually have a better explanation than mine, right? That is the thing, right? I don't need to explain to you. I couldn't even make a video. What happens if, say, Russia? It will not happen. But if the plan originally was to take control of Ukraine, what is the damage and the pressure and the extreme weight that this will have on the Western world, because you will be able to monopolize grain exports and immigration fluxes, and having a more solid presence in the Black Sea, in the Mediterranean, and being able to pressure more closely other countries that were originally part also of the either the Soviet Union itself, of the Warsaw Pact, etc. And this can go on, and making pressure and the usual disinformation. This is that easy, right? It's not that, okay, let's give that Ukraine to Russia. That's it. It's not even about Russia. It's not about even to say, okay, in Russia they live like shit, they have ridiculous life standards, it's terrifying. What kind of culture do you want to hand free stuff to? I mean, you don't give free stuff to anyone because you think, those damn leftists, etc. You do give free stuff to people who are even less than your own culture. And because you also have never read anything about that. This is a very, I know I'm talking to an American audience, and I do follow, in general, American policy and how the young people, let's leave aside what is happening in the US today, because Biden is ridiculous and we all know this. And so you see, you can't be different things that you never hear. Instead, there's somebody that buys the full package, just sticks to that whatever it happens, and everything crumbles around for them and the others, and nothing is accomplished, right? So aside from this, and all the possible conspiracy idiotic ideas, because you see, the cultural difference there is everything, right? It's not that if one, it is true that if one side wins, the other loses, right? And so that one thing is given to the other or the other. But the question is, don't you prefer more civilizationally advanced people to the others who don't? And incidentally, the same people, the civilization you're part of, right? Just knowing, again, how outside of this world other people think, or better, do not think at all, and living in most appalling conditions of radical moral and material misery, without understanding anything about the rest of the world, just wanting to taking you out, right? This is just the first concept that is failed. I've met some idiots that said, but why Russia should do anything about, against eventually us Europeans or the West after they take Ukraine? Well, because that's something that I have been doing since they exist, maybe, right? And the entire foreign policy. Where are you? In the world. Where did you wake up here? After 500 years, right? Did you know what the history of the last century has been? Where the fuck have you been? Right? How do you think that I've heard people who think seriously that Russia is like you treat governments like right or left wing governments. Right? It's not that if you have a Biden administration that buys into that shit of radical leftism, the United States is a leftist country. This is not real, right? Also because part of what happens within the same liberal movement actually doesn't give a shit about those things. Some things are facade things. There is no such thing like right and left. In every country is right and left, right? So at times, somebody who represents formally, namely, whatever, the right or the left comes in power, but the country is something enormous on its own, with an enormous culture and tradition. It has nothing to do, and a civilization, it has nothing to do with being right or left, right? To me, left means being devoid of any form of knowledge, means to tend toward the subpersonal rather than the superpersonal. It means to make moral relativism. It makes to be abandoning to emotions, right? So in countries where paranoia is essentially the existential national identity, where people do not know anything by default because they don't have satisfactory educational standards for a first world country, primary education as adult beings, where they live in appalling sanitary situations with lower, in utter poverty, we do not display any, again, sensible, in any macroscopic indicator, fundamentally, any kind of better quality. Why the hell would you think that is something that you want, even if you still think that's right wing? after tanks that march in Ukraine with the communist flag, with sickle and hammer, right? And people overwhelmingly think in Russia that the Soviet Union was a positive thing. How the fuck do you even trade that for what you have? I mean, how culturally undereducated and inferior do you have to be not to realize this? This is the average standard of both conservatives and liberals. Open every single fucking Facebook group telling these stories about whatever happens and look at the mental deficiency of what they're doing. They're just there to collect scores in likes and to vent their own frustration by, essentially saying, aha, look, this one made a mistake, haha, equally, in both sides of the story, no analysis, no criticism of any freaking kind. And this is just even setting the ABC, right? The minimal standards of an analysis. How do you think, this is the first question I always think about. Let's leave aside politics for a moment, because politics, we know that our brain shuts down when we talk about policy normally, but this is just the emotional tendency that you can feel. You can get heated up, you can think, you cannot control that aspect. But here we're talking about the reason why you may be thinking one thing rather than another, because politics is not one direction. It's either normally two sides, right? But there is, what we forget constantly, the quality of the individual. That is something that raises above and it incidentally makes left and right meaningless at that point. Let's pick warfare, right? Do you, I don't know where you pick the sources for this is not talking just about Ukraine, because now it's the big military stuff. It's a big war and everything, but let's say in general, right, in the past years, even with Syria, with Libya, with Afghanistan, with everything, right, where did you pick information? How did you make your own analysis? Because the entire thing that I see around is, I go against the choice that the politician that I dislike makes a priori. You see, normally when we study military history and we want to be, taken seriously, right? Something like having an expertise or saying you're competent about this because you actually know what you're talking about. Normally, you should assess minimal things like, for example, which is connected with policy, right? But in general, what is this military action, for example, heading? What's the objective, right? First of all. Secondly, how are they accomplishing that? Do I have the means? Do they have the means? Do they have, how fast is this going, right? How many, and then you have something broader. This is how many international factors do you think can pressure the situation? How do you think domestic opinion is really revolving around this? What other indicators do you have? What other countries around are doing? What are the markets doing, and why and how, right? Just knowing these little things, not repeating a mantra saying, because first of all, it's unpredictable, right? This is the thing, that we don't know what will happen in 4 months from now. Nobody knows. There is not a single analyst of the top specialistic one that makes such predictions, because they are impossible, right? In the world, given on an empiric evidence, on our possible, scientific, empirical understanding, and based on experience and on statistics, there is no way you can sensibly make that prediction. You could even make it, but the question is how much you're going to invest in the world in practice on the base of that prediction. That's why we don't know more than 4 months. It's not that we can't roll the dice and choose that. It's that it has to be something that we must connect to an actual purpose and actual reality. And this is also why we need to take sides, because if you really care and you know how hard it is to predict things, the least you invest in the side you're supporting, say, the less likely that side is going to improve over time. So this kind of also, I don't know, I don't really haven't followed very much. I have, again, as a Ukrainian supporter, I absolutely loathe those people who say, yes, we have supported Ukraine, but they don't even know what's happening there. They don't study the war. They don't know anything about Ukraine. They just do it because, again, they take their own side, right? I'm right-wing, you know that, and I support Ukraine, and I believe that right-wingers that support Russia are morons, but I obviously understand that a great part of those who support Ukraine equally are morons, not because they support Ukraine. This is the point. It's not, you can't separate that from what those people are. It's not the side they choose, it's the reasoning that they make. Hell, I even understand the Russian reasons, right? But I disagree with them not because again, I am also from the other side in many ways. I believe that I'm, from the right side of the story. I'm those that should rule because of the traditional values that I believe in and that I radically, in fact, stick to in my worldview on the basis of the most hardcore, in fact, traditional European, Indo-European ones, exactly in this case. But of course, it's about how, the quality of the individual person, what kind of idea they come up with. Making moral relativism, again, so not being able to explain things factually, but just supporting something because, and making up reasons that do not stand on their feet, is not a good sign, right? And the worst thing about this political debates is that, of course, there is much heat in it, but exactly because of it, there is a lack of focus on the comprehensive, right? What the moral relativists would do is they will believe on the basis of some idiotic explanation that narrow aspect of reality is the discriminant between an action and another. Even and especially because I know that rules do not apply to reality when somebody wants to do something. Exactly because of that, right? And trying to entrap reality in a reality that you don't even encompass with your mind by any stretch of the imagination, with a few laces, in a few, in a small cage, pretending that it will fit. It's just leaving you with an unsatisfaction that will always, that is the one that you are trying to fit, to make it fit in there, that will never do, and for which you will be very frustrated. So, of course, part of this broader struggle is trying to make people understand anything about the complexity of reality that they absolutely are paralyzed by. Again, paranoia is the word, right? How do you think that authoritarian or dictatorial, totalitarian regimes make people obeying? Because they make them scared about the outside. They make them think that the entire world is against them because, not because maybe there is a good reason, because maybe they are, they belong to a disgusting, reality that just doesn't have the palest idea of what a superior individual actually means in practice, but make the whole system about, again, being ever less and being just individually brought as yet another expendable in the meat grinder. No, it's because the others are the evil guys. Because the others are... How many people have met? Oh, you have no idea. You have no idea of the rhetoric, all the bullshit. You see, when in the West I discuss with someone, you can spot there some ideas that are somewhat, that reveals you that this person can reason, right? That it can take another idea and making it its own and saying, okay, well, on the base of this, I see something more. I see a bit more far. When you talk with the outer side, it's like you're talking to parrots. They say all the identical phrases. All of them, every single freaking one of them, people that have nothing to do with each other except being under that system, being completely paranoid, having these mottos, and if you just simply debunk them a single another, these people are paralyzed. They refuse any kind of confrontation. They entrench, they shield themselves, they freak out, they don't want to know anything else because they are scared, right? And fear is the first indicator, not just of paranoia, but also of cultural inferiority, of lack of individual superiority, of lack of morals, lack of strength, right? You're so preoccupied that the terrible West will take over the world. So I'm talking to the Westerners. What are you actually doing for changing that? What are you doing for that, for changing that? It's great trouble, this great cosmic battle against, allegedly, a transgender Western world, then that should be yours. By the way, again, you're the one your identity is about, and say, no, it's not my identity, so I have to tear everything down. I don't know. Nobody ever imposed me any transgender or critical race theory in my own life, and nobody ever will, right? And this has nothing to do with the reason why I support my own country, why I support other countries, or I think less of other countries, including my own, by the way, because, as an objective person, I can't say my country is better than this one, but it's also worse than this one. And look, I can improve, and I have a criterion, I have a standard, I have an idea of the mechanism that historically brought to that. Other thing, of course, not knowing history is bringing to that disaster. Because if you don't know history, how can you even claim that there is such a thing like, I don't know, that the Soviet Union was left-wing and Putin's Russia is right-wing? How the fuck do you think that in 30 years anything changes in the head of people that were under 70 years of communism and that were before in practical slavery since ever, to have any kind of opinion or awareness about, first of all, themselves, but secondly also about the rest of the world, which they absolutely don't by any stretch of the imagination, when the entire national identity is founded on paranoia and hysteria that the world wants to take them out, because that's the only glue that can keep such a abysmally, civilizational abortion together, standing on its feet. This is the real problem. And this is not even just to say, okay, well, there was something good about that. Of course, there was something good about the Soviet Union. It was something good about Nazi Germany. It was something good about Italian fascism, right? Because guess why? Because at some point, we were Westerners, I mean, real ones, right? So that's not something that you can erase from a people entirely, except Westernness, again, lays mostly in other areas that, for example, never really were something like fascist, for example. And so you can appreciate some still deficits in democratic culture and civic education even easily on the base of an historical map where you can't deny. Why do you think that the current situation is the way it is historically in any country in the world? It's because it's determined by that. It's not because some country made a pirouette one day and change into something else. And these are secular, millenary even processes that we have decided, and that's because of leftism that has led you presume also as nationalists. Because again, as nationalists, you're leftists, you're collectivists. Realize that. Right, nationalism is anti-European tradition. Nationalism was born in the moment in which the ancien regime was destroyed. It's a mass leftistic, revolutionary red ideology. It's popular. You don't understand that, and you don't understand that because you have been, your brain has been engineered to reason that way, right? Because it's true, the ancien regime was not paradise. The majority of people were just a bunch of imbecile peasants that turn into the imbecile masses that, again, today do not do anything all the day long without any accomplishment fundamentally. And so here's the result. But there is nothing proud to be like that, right? If you know anything about European tradition, you know that it was based on the idea of nobility. The idea of nobility, which is not, again, the sclerotized nobility of the later ancien regime. It was actual individual nobility. What nobility is there in people that, say, we will not invade a country, and the other day they invade the country? The entire Indo-European ideology was founded on he who lies loses immediately the imperium. Immediately means everything crumbles, destroyed. Like the idea of not maintaining your own word, having something called like honor, right? Where is this? You have been so habituated to cultural inferiority that you cannot realize even the most elementary kind of common sense. This is not even tradition per se. This is just what an average person, that you would think as a normal one would normally reason. Where is your dignity? Where is your dignity? How can you take side for side for someone who founds the entire political action on lies, right? This is not about saying, the Americans invaded Iraq because, they faked the chemicals there that they thought they had as a proof. This doesn't mean anything. Do you want to compare that? Do you want to compare the political statements of the United States with the one of Saddam Hussein's Iraq? Right here, this is what it means to be, to spit in the face of moral relativism, because you can have higher or lesser standards, but if you have first of all, if you're an ignorant, you can't have standards because you don't know anything, and so you should just shut up. Secondly, you on the base of dramatic, I don't even want to describe what Saddam Hussein's Iraq actually was, right? And those people say, chemical weapons, they gave it to the United States. Every state gave it to them. The Soviet Union even gave chemical weapons to Saddam when they fought against Iran, right? This has nothing to do. That means moral relativism. It means you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Right here you have two countries. Nobody's perfect, because otherwise we would have already transfigured into divine entities, and we would have a universal empire like in the older times. No, we don't. All right? But if you have to choose between the US and Iraq, you can't whine for Iraq because it was bombed. Because that was a fucking shithole, ruled by a disgusting dictatorship that was exterminating its own people. And we just overthrew that regime. Then we screwed up completely on the ground of how it was handled. But that has nothing to do with the, in principle, legitimacy of wanting to overthrow a freaking dictatorship. Because I would drop the bomb myself. I wouldn't give a shit. You think I would give a shit of killing anyone? Right? Do you think that I wouldn't kill like the first Russian that set, foot in Ukraine and all the others came last? Give me a gun. I'll take them down. I don't do it because I know that political actions have moral consequences, and in my state, if I'm not, I would create more problems to my own cause if I went there fighting, than if I stayed here at home making something else, trying to support the thing. So this is also yet another issue that most people really don't understand, and that's why they loathe democracy. There is a misunderstanding about democracy nowadays. When conservatives says, democracy sucks. Democracy is a misappropriated word in a sense, meaning that what we're living exactly in history has never been quite a democracy as we intended. First of all, it's true, mass society has ruined enormously a great deal of our decisional processes, but the point is that the people at that point had actual power, right? So again, what are we complaining about? Right, if the elite was not fit anymore to rule because it didn't show the good reasons for which it should have happened, and there were lots of problems in those systems, also the masses took over. And the masses took over very gradually, by the way. It's not that, there was ever, first of all, there was never direct democracy. Never, ever, right? The closest things that arrived are some democracies, but not the ones that opted for the dictatorship of the proletariat. It was in those countries where the average people were provided with higher moral superiority. Again, when we talk about the West, why are we looking at democratic countries? Because we think that we are lenient. Democratic countries were born out of, of a dramatically aggressive and performing civilization, like the one of, post-colonial. I mean, the largest empires in the world in the 19th century, if you pick Britain and France, if you wonder why the cradle of democracy was in these countries, was exported eventually. Also, we're talking about the United States as well in part. But if you wonder why this happened, it's because they had accumulated wealth and power. It's because the individual people were provided with more means to succeed. And they were still traditionally pressed by certain values that, in spite of the material wealth that was provided by the scientific knowledge that makes skyrocket their resources, were still standing. Right? What we're witnessing now in this material wealth has increased further, and therefore people have grown fat and lazy. Right? And this is happening everywhere. It's happening in Russia, and also there without cultural resistance, because those values were never, that we had in the West, of enormous rigidity, authority, discipline, force, strength, never existed. right? It could never be achieved because the masses could just be brought down by depauperating them of value. It's not that they were ever like us, ever. They don't have that history. It's completely unknown. They don't know the meaning of it, right? You can't expect from somebody born at the beginning of the third millennium to be like you just because it's contemporary to you. Those peoples do not have that history. Erase it from your mind. The values that you're hoping to find in there do not exist. They have never existed. They still have to learn them. These people are discovering that there is a world only outside of their own, only today, barely, right? If they weren't kicked now back 15 years even in the darkness that they had mildly, just slightly emerging too, and just by Western models, by the way. The people, we're not praising democracy per se. I've never done it. I never thought, again, that democracy as a form, devoid of substance, works. Because you need both, right? In the West, democracy worked because up to a certain point, compared to the rest of the world, we had the better people. Again, we were more intelligent, better educated, longer living. We had more means. We had more opportunities. We are obviously better people. There is no doubt about that. We are more capable of doing things. You say, oh, no, you believe that, just being richer. It's not about being richer. It's about, even if you're a Marxist, you should understand these things, because Marxism says that matter informs even, capacity and everything, right? So this is not even incongruent with your delirium, right? It's just that it brings some moral forces in that you don't even understand what they are. This has nothing to do in the sense that, you're a better person because, I don't know how, a person in the third world maybe is much purer, simpler. Yeah, but it's a simpler person, right? If you ask that person to create something with a capacity connected to your own intelligence, your own education, etc., will not be able to do that. They will be very good at maybe, handling their affairs in their farm. Maybe, and maybe for that system they're even good people, because in spite of rape and incest and whatever they're also okay with, they make their own world maybe going better and more orderly than yours. But it doesn't mean that in absolute terms those people projecting in your world would be able to do anything. Maybe they will. First of all, this is always the same with primitive peoples. When you project them in more advanced realities, they don't have cultural resistance, so they are the ones that immediately collapse. And this is the disaster that we're doing. Like bigger countries like India, like China, etc., they are risky because they haven't attained, they haven't cultivated over the millennia the civilizational discipline required to attain those results. Reason for which they will collapse earlier. Reason for which, they're less democratic, properly in culture, in civic, in education than us. Right? Democracy doesn't mean let's give you free money for not doing shit. Democracy means that you live next to a person who is valuable. This is actually the same sacred traditional principle of the original Indo-Europeans. Indo-Europeans believed that fundamentally, in order to be part of that group, you had to be noble. You had to have some standards, and everybody was considered like that. Yes, there were slaves, but slaves were also fitting that pre-industrial system. Today, we realize that slavery is not a good idea because factually it is not, right? It just makes people, unproductive for the means that you need to handle that are much more, that require much more than ever. You will just ingrain this deep hatred towards the masters. They will still be some sort of awkward presence that you will have to keep down and spend resources keeping down. And again, in the past, this was done, say, if you knew how to keep down your slaves, you were also a successful person. Today, just think of spending your own day, whatever job you have, trying to keep down people that live in your household and that were probably trying to escape or killing you and escaping, right? So it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any freaking sense because it's simply another world. Democracy, on the other hand, should be based on this concept. I know that democracy is an uncomfortable word, right? Especially from a conservative standpoint. But again, this is the question you should pose yourself. In which world would you like to live? In a world where everybody's intelligent and valuable, and rich and capable and productive and accomplished and responsible and knowledgeable and strong? Or do you want to live in a world where there are just a few very capable people at the top, but the rest of the masses are disgusting? What we are trying to attain, what with democracy and the costs, because it does require exactly that awareness of the political and strategical balance and how to attain it, which the average person is losing and has arguably never had, but is sinking now, right? Again, among people. So that this system can self-operate. And you know what's the point of this all? That people have to be politically cohesive, right? What were the most successful people in history? People that were just highly feudal in character? Because even when we make videos about how the High Middle Ages always say that the feudal system actually is the one that that helped to grow, and because they were the capable leader. Yeah, they were, but because first of all, the average people, again, came from darkness, right? There were dramatically poor means, and these guys were the ones who were habituated to rule because they had, in a private system without public authority, managed to seize as much as they could. But our feudalism in the West was never like the feudalism, say, existed in China, or even there with a bureaucracy or something, but there were just a very few guys at the top, and the rest, the oceanic masses of people just breaking their backs in the fields. In the West, we didn't have the same measure of that, right? Even our feudalism went fundamentally, in parallel, as you know, with a great development also of autonomous communities, of other powers that were next door. So these systems were mitigated. They weren't just a sclerotic system like the Byzantine Empire, for example, were really there. It was just a few guys at the top, and the entire system basically didn't have any autonomy whatsoever, and it collapsed immediately, and the West didn't. Guess why? Unit of command is important, but unit of command is more effective when everybody agrees. Political cohesion is the base of every single military success, right? How do you think the Romans took over the world? How do you think the Hellenic city-states flourished and managed even to withstand the Achaemenid invasion, right? Because they were peoples that in those times had an average kind of homogeneous uniform strength as individuals. The Hellenic citizenry, the Romano-Italic peasantry, right? They were all more or less on the same level, right? And they actively participated. They were still oligarchic system. I'm not saying that they were democratic system. They never were, right? I'm using that system, like I'm criticizing that term all the time because, of course, these were, compared to our systems, dramatically more feudal systems and private systems and clienteling systems. But they weren't. They were still based on a kind of egalitarianism. Also the Germans, right, during the migration era, which were the strongest peoples. They were the ones who had a greater, a more powerful middle class. Hell, I studied the Longobards. How do you think they crushed the Gepids? The Gepids were dramatically verticized. They had a very few noble rich at the top, and all the rest were just, we know from the graves, right, from the grave goods. They were just weak. So in a battlefield where the Longobards had an extraordinary amount of sports for the middle class, it shows that the middle classes were robust. It means that on a battlefield, you're going to simply steamroll those freaking Gepids, because you have the bulk of the majority that is a freaking battle machine that is able to do it because they're free. They have nurtured their own resources on their own. They participate to politics. They're stronger. They unite because they see a common enemy. So the world that you're trying to undermine in the form of democracy is not wrong in the measure in which we have democracy as a formal political institutional system. It is wrong because people are regressing to the level of non-democratic systems, right? And this is the point. Again, it's not democracy. Democracy doesn't mean that you have to dress up like a queer. Democracy doesn't mean that you have to enforce multiculturalism. Democracy doesn't mean tolerance. Everybody has standards. We simply can't rise the standards, right? Again, what we're witnessing is something we're witnessing in the entire world, right? Even countries, again, like India, Brazil, China, Russia, like came from a traditional background that in the past had kind of a stricter, for example, reliance on the moral strength of the individuals. They were less powerful in that sense than the Westerners that took over the world in the 19th century because of that. But they also had a working ethics. They also had this idea of equality, of honor, something like that in principle, right? They're collapsing in those countries. They're collapsing even quicker, right? We complain that in the West we don't know shit about our own past. In the rest of the world, they don't know even the most remote glimpse about their own past. Nobody teaches them. They're prey, again, of freaking systems that, again, more or less democratic. Now I mentioned Brazil. It's nothing to do with China or something, but you understand what I mean. I'm talking about and that's where a true democratic culture emerges. Realizing that having presidents that are just evidently there to lie, not because they are lying on the subtleties of institutional processes or whatever they say, not say, but just saying, no, let's fuck another country, or the enemies are pigs or something like that. That's the average tone that they're using, right? You understand they're inferior to just even a disgusting Biden administration. They have nothing to teach them. And even when, of course, they are clever in a sense. I mean, if you pick China, I think they're dumb, right? I wouldn't think that the government, I mean, look at Russia, right? What they just did. Or China itself, I doubt that the elite of China, the ruling class of China, the government of China is made up of really, strong, developed, intelligent people. I don't think so, because just the communist background prevents you from having that, right? But at the same time, since, for example, they manage more power and they are under important strains, like look at what happened with the recent lockdowns and all the issues that they're having now, because the Chinese economy is in deep, trouble due to the recent events, etc. And they have pressured people in their communist alleged utopia are starting to freak out, because again they're not even habituated to the kind of, after all, yes, they are authoritarian means, if not wars, to keep them in the houses, etc. But they're obviously, a regime that handles a bigger system, right? And so they are, let's say, less than a joke than, I don't know, another, post-socialist country that supports Russia, right? As a type of, level of capacity. So what I'm saying is that also the idea of a universal empire, this idea of being scared, imperialism, right? There are idiots who think, I don't know, that Putin is fighting American imperialism. Well, Russian policies, history, strategy, and culture is entirely based exclusively on imperialism since the very first Tsars, right? So that is the entire point of the term. But even there, right, there is at least normality of how it should happen. We should, as Westerners, I think, first of all, Europe by itself, by vocation, is protectionistic and colonialistic. I wouldn't have any problem if Europe came back being a colonialist force once again, and we will probably become it again. But secondly, I have no problem with the idea of a superior power, right? After pick the United States. I test every day how also anti-Americanism, and it's a form of envy, right? It's that form of paranoia that derives from people who do not understand reality and think that, it's a problem that there is an overlord over someone. The greatest moment of superiority of Western civilization is whenever there was a universal empire ruling the entire world. And guess why they ruled the entire world? Because they were terrible and evil? Not because they were superior to the others. Because, again, if you don't have the decisive moral superiority of the people, you cannot rule. So whoever was eventually taken over and stayed there, unless it wasn't wiped out, stayed there. Right? You cannot argue that the Roman Empire wasn't a positive thing for the West. You cannot argue that even maybe not in the unitarity of the empire, but still in the idea of of the existence of a universal imperial force in the Middle Ages, there was much of also what modern Westerners actually lays in capacity of balancing power, etc. The United States managed with others, including, but some can be just a tool, right? You can also be a blind barbaric force like the Soviet Union, who lost over 20 millions, right, in a disgusting way. In 1944, where the Stavka was to overthrow Stalin just because of the sheer amount of dead soldiers, right? They were just throwing them, again, as always. They didn't even give a fuck about them. They were a fucking communist dictatorship, but at least the generals who knew something about, practice, began to think that was insane, right? Even if they were winning the war. So even what kind of victories was that for the Soviets in World War II? I mean, ironically enough, the Japanese, the Italians, and the Germans are the people that have the longest living average in the world, and some of the richest countries in the world today. What about Russia, right? Was it worth winning the Second World War at that cost? I made a video, by the way. The Russians, for the record, live like 10 years less on average. So I make a video about the relativity of victory and defeat, right, in a Clausewitzian terms, right? This is not relativism. This is simply saying, victory and defeat are instrumental to something, right? Remaining standing on your feet because you're a disgusting totalitarian regime that kills its own people and in the millions and doesn't give a fuck about making anything working correctly, that destroys its own army by slaughtering people that are just the suspects of being anti-regime, and sends hundreds of thousands of people being butchered against a smaller nation like Finland, whatever. I don't know how to say that, but even if you win the war, you haven't won anything. The Soviets were brutally repressed after World War II because they had thought, also during the laxity that had ideologically happened during World War II, to kind of respirit some sort of nationalism and pan-Slavism, to give some force that communism had eradicated from the few that Russia had accumulated over time. They hoped in a liberalization, in something. They were brutally repressed. They were some of the most ferocious, nightmarish times of the hellish Stalinism, right? And there are people that are even saying, oh, well, those were necessaries. Well, I tell you what was not necessary. Being a freaking communist totalitarian regime that for 70 years made people living in disgusting conditions of moral and material misery, plus making hundreds of thousands living in terror and oppression, whatever, in the Warsaw Pact countries, whenever communism managed to, where Soviet influence and communism in general, so from other countries managed to extend its own control, and that was simply disintegrated by the fact that the entire system failed and collapsed because the people that lived in it said fuck you, and they got independent from communist abomination of mankind. That's the story, and those countries are still recovering today because of that phase of poverty. Right? This is insane. Again, who do you want to stand against? What I was saying is that Americans, British, others liberated us, right, and liberated us again from nationalist socialist. Right? We should also recover this. This insanity that for some reason, socialism is just socialism. No. First of all, any socialism was nationalistic. The Soviet Union was easily displaying macroscopic traits of Russian imperialism. The same can be said about the reverse. National Socialism was actual socialism. It was a socialistic state. It was run like that. Even fascism, the second most statalized country in the world after the Soviet Union, was fascist Italy. But these are things you should learn in history books. I learned these things in school, right? I didn't even take to go to a university to know the ABC of political history. The Americans, you can dislike them. I don't give a damn. You can say, they had segregation, they were racist, they were, exalted, some of them even, sided with Nazism. Well, these people, at the end of the day, their state, so the decisive moral force of the population went here, freeing us and making us living with the highest living standards in the world up to today, right? I have NATO bases in my country. I will take bombs for the United States if there is a nuclear. Well, I would be pulverized because where I live, I know that, and I'm cool with that, and I'm cool with standing together with any other NATO country to say, you know what, you want to destroy the world, we're going to blow the hell out of you, and nobody wants that, right? And it's simple as that. Why should I hate the United States? Why should I hate NATO? Because they bombed, I don't know, Serbia, while it was sponsoring genocide in Bosnia and carrying out ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. I think it's a good thing to have bombed them. What's the problem, right? If you had been a normal country, nobody would have bombed you. It's not that one day, I don't know, Spain does something strange, the Americans arrive and bomb Spain. Or Denmark starts freaking out and we decide as NATO to bomb the hell out of it. It doesn't happen. Why? Because we are a freaking civilization who is politically cohesive, and we have the freaking best, again, standards in the world ever. We're the only ones, we are the richest, most powerful, and we even complain because we are eroding our own society as a millenary process for which the masses usually do not improve over time. And this may be the only fault of democracy, but it's not democracy per se. This is also saying that we have been, again, promised this kind of effortless achievement without keeping up the moral standards, right? So there is a battle right now that we are fighting against this. It is also about fighting a radical leftistic ideology, which is Marxistic, that is to say, scientifically designed to erase humanity from the face of the earth by any standard. I made an explanation about Marxism, Leninism. Okay, well, that was mostly about Bolshevism, but at the end of the day, it's the same core. This thing of nationalism, why would you revert to smaller state so that the bigger fish will eat everybody and you will end up in slavery and misery when you can be united and powerful in ruling over the rest of the world? What's wrong in ruling over the rest of the world? If this is achievable, because, again, you must have a political and social superiority to achieve this. Other people should look at you and say, wow. And this is what what the United States has been up to this point. And you can dislike them, you can say they have problems, and you can have that they're messed up and whatever. Yes, but still, they have attained this. And they have attained, us by enslaving us. Because my country skyrocketed after World War II. And we were the fascists. So I don't understand this point, right? This was the medicine for becoming a functional system, much more stable, much more intelligent, much more profitable, with a dramatic life quality improvement. Why would any imbecile that is not essentially a fascist or a communist think that what is happening, what is going on with the US and NATO is a problem? Why? Well, you can say, well, again, because they bombed Iraq. They bombed Iraq because it was a freaking dictatorship. If the Americans were stupid because they didn't have a freaking exit strategy, it's their own problem, but it's not the problem in itself. The thing was okay for what they could gain. Same goes for Afghanistan. They made it was shameful the way they went away. It was a mistake, and this is part of the general collapse that we're witnessing, also at the level of elites, again, in the West. But this is, again, not because we are going under, or because we don't have the means to compete with the others. This is the greatest insanity. We're simply the most powerful, right? So if we lose here and there, it's just because we decided not to give a damn about that. And it's exactly what also the nationalism, the socialism in part is saying. Who does hate Israel today? The far right and far left. Because they are, again, the same paranoid, national socialist, subpersonal, paranoid ideology who thinks that there is some terrible evil that is ruling the world, and for some reason they can't do anything about that, but they still live like in the best countries in the world for some strange reason, and not in slavery like in other countries, but never mind that. And so let's do this shit. That's literally it. And again, you can't complain when there are dumb people around and saying, okay, well, what are we going to do with them? Objectively, they will go down. They will go down, and they will probably stay there, right? I'm not again, I'm not optimistic about the future. I've never been either pessimistic. I think that some things work and will keep working, but in my opinion, what will actually happen in quite a while, we will simply revert to some sort of feudalism, where again, maybe somebody will manage to lead us better in a more intelligent fashion. I must say that our current governments are not doing overwhelmingly bad overall, right? They're slow, they're bitchy, they quarrel within each other, etc. But at the same time, that this has always happened historically. I mean, if you read the historical relation around even some of the greatest successes of the West, I mean, we're talking about the Battle of Vienna. Well, the Westerners were doing the worst things against each other, were quarreling, they didn't want to get involved. But in our history books, it passed down to the great heroism of the Westerners. Actually, there, without papal money, without huge diplomatic effort, tried to put together Poland, the Habsburgs, other German, Italian countries, etc., to make a concerted effort, right, and to make the result that it was. It was terrifying. It was to the last moment. It was recklessly late, right? But they made it. They made it anyway, and so it's happening today. So even they are claiming gnostically, things are always going wrong, and being petrified, everything, every mistake and every difficulty that there is, I self-hate myself, so I'm happy that the system is crumbling. It's just not a reality. You're just you being an idiot, not contributing to the effort of the same, essentially, of the same thing you're investing in, and you are invested in whether you like it or not, and bringing, making it ever more difficult when somebody's actually working for the better. And this is stupid because it's self-sabotaging, right? Even if you did this thing that perplexes me the most is pretending that these attitudes are, again, for the national interest, for your suzerainty. What kind of suzerainty are you think to achieve at the eve of the third millennium? How do you think even a single country, even if it were just the United States alone, could it make it alone in this world? Right? We managed to create this Atlantic alliance that is great, actually. And we have very cool allies all over, and a good part of the rest of the world, the civilized one, is also siding with us. Because it's obvious, because it's just about the stability of the world. And again, it's not the stability of a regime that wants to suck your blood, right? Because the reason why, even if that was true, somebody was exploiting you, it's good to exploit if you let... if other people let themselves being exploited. Again, why are you afraid that there is a terrible superpower that is hidden in the clouds that is sucking your blood if you don't do anything about your life of any sort? You don't study, you don't work, you think that you can understand the world without even reading a book, or I don't know, doing something, or even having that minimal scientific preparation, which means at least having studied three or four books about the single issue. If you switch the TV on and if you don't have any other essentially background, and you think you can understand the war in Ukraine from whichever background you come, you will not make it. You will not understand that. That's not science. That's not quality information. That's not an analysis. Not a good criticism. It's not a real application. It's just nonsense that you are being fed with in a way that you're ever less defended mentally, because you cannot distinguish what a journalist on television says from even the sources that they use, that they actually sources of speaking out of other sources that you should also check out, and that you can also check in the hundreds on the internet, and you don't do because you're too lazy and dumb even to know that they exist. And so why if I were, for example, that blood-sucking power, wouldn't I want to exploit you? I mean, it's on your head. it's normal. That's again why feudalism eventually forms, because the poor in morals, right? Rather, yeah, they can be usually also the poorer in material as well. But poverty is a matter of mind, right? It is, because you can be the richest person in the world. If you're stupid, you don't know what to do with that. Look at TV stars of whatever. Do you think they're normal people? They're happy people? They're satisfied people? They're just a bunch of dumbasses. Then that's what they are. Do you think they have a good life? If you think so, it's because probably you're pretty much like them. You think that, again, in a materialistic, deterministic, relativistic sense, only if you have money you can do something. And so you're exactly the one who will never make money, because that's just your problem. You have to make your mind work, which is a very different thing, right? So at that point, why would I want to exploit you, right? If you're gullible, if you're dumb, I'm going to sell you bad stuff. You don't have the understanding that's bad. Why what do I care about, right? Unless it's a fraud and kind of unfairly misleading. But even there's a line that you can't quite say, okay, well, it's always there. You have to mature by yourself. So the idea of a superpower is the most unspeakable one, because at the end of the day, again, this superpower may be just a feudal lordship. Maybe it's not unspeakable, but somebody would trade that for some form of greater superiority. At this point, we're so alienated and ignorant that you would even hand your house keys to people who carry out genocide and who do not have the minimal contempt over you, and think that you're just decadent, corrupt, and incapable, and they just hate you and they want to steal your stuff, right? Ask yourself if you would do it for any other person. You would do it for, the normal, leader of an hostile country and its people. And if this superpower can be made up of all of us, and having each of us a collegial power, a true egalitarian standpoint where all countries decide that the greater benefit is to cooperate to a single goal, we can have the world entire. The West has the means of doing this, right? Again, Europe has all the right to have its community of defense, to return to a colonial approach. That is, we can intervene in other countries by securing our interests, by extending trade, partnership, whatever, mutual benefit with a very compact, professional, multitask, readily deployable armed force. The system will make immediately benefiting. You see, many people do not even understand the concept of deterrence, right? It's like those dumb, Russian TV hosts who say, we can't hit Berlin or Paris or London in I don't know how many, like in 2 minutes or whatever. Just imagine how stupid an audience must be to be happy that essentially their life, before they're going to be wiped out by nuclear weapons in their own country, is going to be shortened the time that missile goes faster. Right? That is called cultural inferiority. That means that you don't even understand the ABC of what a child would autonomously understand, because you're too stupid not to be dominated by somebody else. And that's the difference between citizens and subjects, and servants and slaves, right? So these are real things. These are real adult people who believe in that. There are Russian mothers, the same ones that, whose children come back in coffins from Ukraine, that actually believe this bullshit. And then you start making the equation, well, maybe they actually deserve that, because before putting another bastard out in the world, you may want to check to avoid being a radically culturally underdeveloped ethno-nationalist, social populistic, and genocidal racialistic cow, and perhaps getting something called human decency and looking something like worth, resembling the dignity of something called woman, right? And so to me, I really don't want to give anything to this, right? The entire force I will use is to just demolish, to undermine, to make collapse that very few that makes these things standing on their feet. because it's so few. It's even less than the already abysmal critical race theory or transgenderism bullshit ideologies that have literally not even a single minimal element of moral scientific evidence from theirs, not even one. And it's just the stupidity of people that allows them to exist, right? Putin is transgenderism. That's how far you can go, because it's objectively the same thing. It's the subpersonal, chthonic, Dionysian darkness that is brought by National Socialism to the world. It's only it. Superior people are intelligent, are authoritative, are rational, know how to use violence efficiently. And I say everything, you perfectly know what I'm referring to, given the Russian performance in Ukraine. They have real charisma, right? They're not like sociopaths, scaring other sociopaths in order to have anything. They have people to use basic rationality, knowing how to distinguish, again, absolute from relative, having studied real history, not a propagandistic, potpourri of bullshit come out of post-Soviet, mental delirium. Here we have to teach people what civilization is. And especially we have to teach people that civilization is not a personal opinion, right? And this is all. This is what really we need for the future. Nothing else. This system will probably crumble. I'm not saying it will stay in its fate. I never thought about that, because I've always seen that, again, the masses are doomed, right? The children that are being born today, they're doomed. They will not have anything. They will be slaves. They will be slaves easily. They already are. The majority of people is already in slavery. They're already depending on someone else. They're already within a clientelary system. They're sinking further because they're giving up. Hell, I've seen it so often, so damn often in history, that all the time there's a crisis, people stop. At some point, they tilt, right? They say, okay, I don't want to pay, we are under attack. Okay, I don't, it requires an effort. Okay, I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to know about politics. Yeah, whatever comes to rule over me, point. Then somebody else, half of a millennium later, comes and say, oh, the system is so oppressive because, the rich, evil people took over. Well, they took over because the others were weak, and they accepted being ruled by them consensually, right? And even when there was enforcement and violence, but that thing is, if those people had armed themselves and had really had the will of preserving their own liberty, they would have preserved it, because no totalitarian regime ever lasted, right? And because it's just a stupid idea to pretend to control people's minds, because moral forces cannot be quantified. We already know that. It's the most elementary notion of strategic culture and education. You can't control that. If you don't even know how to use violence, how can you rule on people? This is the entire point of the story. And frankly, I'm fed up. I'm fed up to saying, oh, but we should help. We should. What are you doing to help? You're telling people that everything is cool, even when they are completely out of control. They are lenient. They do not accept any form of order. They say that everything is the same, that somebody's truth is their truth, and so you can make moral relativism about anything because there is no order, nobody knows. We are full of books. Read them. Right, we have already passed through the point. We know what that order is achieved like, what rationality is achieved like, how clarity is achieved like, how science is achieved like, how morals are achieved like. We were writing about this stuff even up to 80 years ago, before Marxists kicked in universities. We have been completely cerebrated. Just think that there are people who even think that capitalism is a real thing. Capitalism does not exist. It's a communist invention that entered in somebody's mouth. So there are lots of people, I'm a capitalist. Capitalist was invented as a term by communists you dumbass. Capitalism does not exist. It's just a natural economic system. It's just how humans interact and prosper in reality. How all peoples ever, even communist regimes, had to be capitalist according to them in the rest of the world, because that's how actors interact with each other in a normal human relation, not with the other human is a brain-dead imbecile who thinks that there is no responsibility and that we're just terrible oppressors. It's you see, I realize I should make more videos even about communism, because at this point I realize that young people, this is what scares the hell out of me, young people do not have any idea. Like, they call themselves communists, it's the same reason they call themselves, I don't know, girls call themselves boys, etc., because they feel frustrated, or vice versa, because they just want to shout, look at me, because they are habituated just to be fed with attention and not achieving anything individually. Right? That's it. It's people claiming to be depressed. You're not depressed if you are just under pressure by things you can't handle. Being depressed has nothing to do with that. It just means you're a failure, and that you don't have enough backbone to go on. Right? And we are, again, being ever more lenient in the typically, again, Dionysian Chthonic side of the story that says, yeah, let it go, don't think about that, don't take responsibility, okay, destroy everything. That's how totalitarianisms took over. Okay, want that? You'll see how cool that is. Right, you'll see how cool that is. So this video is pretty weird. As you heard at the beginning of the same, I wanted to talk about education, but I think that I still talk about education through this stuff, because I wanted to say what will the future look like for publishers, for article writers, for historians. That's an interesting thing. I could even briefly digress. I just wanted to say that essentially all the articles we're writing right now is completely useless. All the call for papers, but nobody will read them. You see, who does read them? Right? People at best buy Osprey books. They every once in a while, and just the single bullshit they're interested in, and the rest they don't care. Ospreys are good, by the way. But I'm just saying that, it's just that hyper specialistic thing, and nobody looks around, and so that comprehensive understanding of reality fails, and therefore you wonder why moral relativism is all over the place. So I think that historians will become some sort of humanistic kind of model. Like, somebody will pay them privately and they will make money, and just true actual quality will be, will have its voice, probably not saying things too much out loud, but maybe supporting the regime, but still maybe saying something qualitative, where the rest of the people will not absolutely be able to do anything like that. Like, school is useless, right? It's not that it's useless because you shouldn't go to school, you shouldn't do things like that, but like the way it is, maybe it will help you, but the way, the original purpose for which school was planned doesn't exist anymore, right? So you can go there, but it will not to get an education. At best, it will be to socialize, to stay a bit in line. If somebody still cares, that's it. But educationally speaking, zero. Right? It will be completely useless. If you go to school today, it's not. Again, the idiot who thinks that this means to stop studying is the worst, because they don't understand that they should be studying privately on their own. Right? But they, of course, if nobody, nor in the family, nor in the school teaches them, they have no idea, and they have no standards, and so zero. And so that's actually the reality, how we see it. People go to school just because formally they in theory must put up this masquerade of pretending that they're there to learn anything. The same goes for university. That maybe will maintain some standards still for a while, but is already too bad. Right, I'm reading new publications, etc. They don't even check sources anymore. I mean, let's be honest. It's like medievalists, PhDs in Europe. The majority of PhDs in Europe doesn't know Latin, cannot translate Latin. How can you be a medievalist? I mean, be something else. Go, work the land. Go fishing. Go do something else. If you want to go become, I don't know. I don't advise you to do anything more complex than that. Maybe that fatigue, that's what you are good for. But because if you study equally in the same way for medicine, I don't want to be under surgery by you. But just, how the hell do you even, you see what standards mean. How the hell do you even pretend to know anything? Let's the Middle Ages, okay, but in general, right? If you don't learn Latin, right? How did you even think that you could study medieval history? What's wrong with you? Aren't you disgusted by yourself? This is the problem. I know them. I know these people around. They don't know Latin. They're medievalists. They're PhDs. They're not like freaking stupid bachelor thesis, idiots that will go their life doing something completely different. These are the people who are supposedly, and we are teaching, right, something, which I don't want to even know what it is, right? But these are the actual medievalists. It's becoming a joke. It's become a joke, but from quite a while, right? The 70s were the undermining moment. Like from again, it started with Marxism, mostly in the Anglo-Saxon world, and spread now in the rest. At least in continental Europe, we had kind of better communists sometimes. We're actually more lecture people. Today, it's I must say there are not much communists anymore, but the standards are set for that low, cheap value, quantity versus quality stuff. And again, nobody's going to read that because how many articles are they, right? How can you even cover them? It doesn't make any sense, right? So the idea of quality is completely lost as any kind of morality or lesson, whatever. So I'd say the system will collapse. Quite soon we will understand why do I make Schwerpunkt at the end of the day? Because aside from my I don't have problems in my life, so I can keep going on with the academic thing, but at best I will get, I don't know, more than 4,000 euros a month when I will be old. But I already made more money than my colleagues now just through Schwerpunkt and donations and other private consultancy, etc. Easily. So why should I do that in parallel? So you see, this is my body of thought, and in part very crazily and whatever, but you understand that today's was more like a video, was more like a rant, whatever. But you see, for every single one of these topics, I have I can't talk equally for the same amount of time, jumping from a thing to another within the same topic in the same way, right? I'm following, for example, the entire set of operations of the war in Ukraine since the very beginning. Never made a video about that, but I think it's very interesting, right? Even just, it's not a matter of signing. Again, I have Russian contacts. I don't give a shit about that. But let's say it's cool from a strategic point of view, right? It's a nightmare from a human point of view, but still there is way of learning out of that. The opinions you hear are wild, and they have nothing to do with what is happening on the ground, in a way or another. There's nothing flattering about the Russians or the Ukrainians per se, right? There is just real war, which is freaking cool in the sense that it shows you how it really happens historically, right? Even if it's the worst thing you can imagine on the ground, a huge tragedy, people die, innocents die, it's terrifying, but at least it teaches you how it really is, and that's what we should study, right? I must say, again, here, there's not much to understand why the Ukrainians are doing a good job. With their means, right, which we shouldn't give for granted. So this is obviously understandable from the situation. They just know what happens if they lose. So obviously they're gonna fight. Moral forces from Clausewitz. Does that tell you anything? Right? Do you have an idea why the Russians screwed up so badly, and they had more than 30,000 dead? Well, this is, even now you say, that's an inflated number. I don't think it's the inflated number, honestly. Even if it's what the Ukrainians say, that's pretty damn close to the same figures. right? We're assessing to 15,000 in April, something like that, and it doesn't even matter at this point, right? Even if they increase or they decrease in rate, this is really something that shows the lack of moral forces. You can't send people to fight by making them sign in a boxing program in a gym and finding them, a couple of months later into a foreign country pretending that's a way of motivating a trooper, right? And struggling, finding, again, all those who think of the giant versus, David and Goliath should tell you anything. It should teach you something. But about that, it's like the Putin doesn't want mobilization because he knows what happens if the Russians find out. Where the Russian hawks are screaming because they want mobilization. So just think the implications, right, of the political, the moral effects on countries when people still babble about how many, it's just about how many more or less tanks are blown up or not. This is the things that really matter. This is how long they can take this. I love totally how China still keeps out. It says yes, we are friends with Russia. We want, but we it should be a responsible settlement. Of course, external attacks to Russia should be, Russia has the right to respond. But try to find something agreeable. And the Russians were still asking for support, material support. It's terrifying. But this is also the sanctions are hitting more us than them. Yes, you should see what will happen when the Russians will have pile of money and depending for imports on countries that are just there to turn their back as soon as things screw up, right? And they're bleeding. They're starting to bleed really much. We will see now how hard it can be. And again, we sit as Westerners on a fucking pile of money that never ends. That never freaking ends, and we're still complaining. The fuel it's above €2 at the pump. Oh my God, this will surely bring to the collapse of Western civilization. €2 at the pump. Yes, as if we didn't, withstand the worst possible things ever. The 2 world wars, multiple invasion wars, continuous distractions, natural climate. No, it's gonna be €2 at the pump that will make the entire system collapse. Keep believing that. Keep believing that you're so weak that that's how you're taken down. See what the Indo-European hero would have thought of you. Basically you're just like a bug in comparison. A bug has more resistance objectively, and but that's the in their view, and that's not negotiable. Because reality is not negotiable. Humanity is negotiable. Unfortunately. Reality is not. Right? So humanity makes reality change. If they spend something to do it. If they dare becoming capable of doing that. Otherwise, nothing. This is my main concern. Again, it's more the internal lack of energy that I think will be partly compensated because again, the more you lose control on these people and the more kind of robotic they become. Of course, there is less drive, but still we have more than enough drive for this at this point in history, for considering all our resources and compared to one of others, right? But okay, now I'm digressing too much on this thing. In any case, for today, stop it here. I know that some of you will want me dead after this, but I don't care. A reason for which I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.